All right, so today we're going to be looking at salt marshes.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to be taking a deep dive into these thanks to this really awesome school project
Cool.
by these two students, Kesser and Steen.
Nice.
And when I say salt marsh, I'm talking about this sort of in-between zone where the land meets the sea,
Right.
and it's regularly flooded by seawater.
Okay.
And that creates this really unique habitat.
Yeah, and it's amazing what lives there with all that salt and the regular flooding.
Well, that's what's really cool about this project is that Kesser and Steen were particularly interested in
wow, cool.
how salt marshes are managed and what we can do to actually help protect these places.
Yeah, makes sense.
And they actually came across some pretty amazing discoveries about the impact of grazing on these
yeah.
ecosystems.
I'm interested to hear more about that.
Yeah, so before we dive into all that, maybe we can just like lay some groundwork.
Yeah. Okay.
Where do we typically find these salt marshes?
So they're typically found kind of all over the world in these sheltered areas along coastlines,
Okay.
like in those beautiful fjords or shallow seas where the water's relatively calm.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it's like a Goldilocks zone for salt marsh formation.
I like that.
Yeah, so not too rough, not too dry, just the right amount of that salty seawater flooding in and out with the tides.
Well, that makes me think of what Kesser and Steen actually noted in their research,
Okay.
which is that within a salt marsh, you get these different zones.
Oh, yeah.
And these zones are based on how often they're flooded by the tides.
Right.
So it's almost like a real estate market for plants,
I like that analogy.
where some areas are considered prime waterfront property.
Definitely. Yeah, so you have like the lower marsh, which basically gets submerged in salt water, like a lot of the time.
Right.
So only the truly salt-tolerant species can actually survive there.
Like what?
So we're talking things like Salicornia.
Yeah.
These are the real superheroes of the salt marsh world.
They can just handle it.
Oh, yeah, they thrive in it.
That's so cool.
And then you have a bit further inland, like the higher marsh, and it still gets flooded, but not as often.
Right.
So you get like a different mix of plants that can handle some salt, but they prefer a bit more dry land.
Okay.
So things like Puccinellia maritima.
Interesting. And is that the end, or is there like...
Well, it's interesting because as you move even further inland,
Okay.
you start to see this transition zone called a salt meadow,
Okay.
or a Strand-Overdrev, as it's called in Denmark.
Oh, wow.
And those meadows still have a salty influence, but they're less frequently flooded.
Gotcha.
So it creates yet another unique habitat.
So we've got all these different zones and these plants.
Right.
But what about the animals?
Oh, the animal life.
Yeah, like what kind of creatures call these places home?
Oh, the biodiversity is incredible.
Yeah.
You've got wading birds and gulls. They're feasting on the mudflats.
I can imagine that.
Geese and ducks grazing on the vegetation.
Okay.
And even some amphibians,
Really?
like the natterjack toad.
I've never even heard of that.
Yeah, well, they need those temporary ponds that form in the marsh.
Hold on, temporary ponds.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, as the tides come in and out,
Right.
it creates these little pools of water that are perfect breeding grounds for the toad.
Okay.
But the thing is, those ponds dry up pretty quickly.
Oh, wow.
So the tadpoles, they have to develop fast.
It's like a race.
Exactly. It's a race against time.
That's wild.
So it's this whole incredible ecosystem teeming with life.
That's so cool.
But here's where things get a bit tricky.
Okay.
Salt marshes face this major threat.
Like what?
Overgrowth.
Overgrowth.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic because it often comes from a lack of human intervention.
Okay.
You see, for centuries, humans have used salt marshes as grazing land,
Oh, yeah.
especially for livestock like sheep and cattle.
Right.
And this grazing actually helped maintain this open character of the marsh
Okay.
and kept those pesky bushes and trees in check.
So the cows and sheep were like natural lawnmowers.
Exactly. But as traditional grazing practices have kind of declined,
Okay.
a lot of salt marshes have become overgrown.
Oh.
And that's bad news for all the plants and animals that rely on those open habitats.
Right. Because they need that space.
Exactly. They need the space to thrive.
Okay, so this is where it gets interesting.
Yeah, Kesser and Steen's project gets really fascinating here.
Okay, let's hear it.
So they found out that one group of animals that's particularly affected by this overgrowth is birds of prey.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That makes sense.
Okay.
I guess they need those wide open spaces to hunt.
exactly. A contact that they had at the Ministry of Environment actually helped them
Oh, cool.
understand this connection a little bit better.
Okay.
And they pointed them to some research showing how certain birds of prey actually rely on those open areas of salt marshes to spot and capture their prey.
Oh, wow.
And so as bushes and trees start to take over,
Right.
their hunting grounds just shrink and their populations can decline.
Wow. So it's like this chain reaction.
Yeah.
Less grazing equals more bushes and trees.
Right.
Which then impacts the birds of prey.
Exactly. It's all connected.
It's all connected,
Yeah.
but there's got to be something we can do to like reverse this trend.
Oh, for sure there is.
Okay, good.
Kesser and Steen, in their research, highlighted a couple ways we can actually manage and protect salt marshes.
Okay.
And one of the most effective strategies is to actually bring back the grazers.
Wait, so you mean reintroduce those cows and sheep back into the salt marshes?
Yeah, exactly. Controlled grazing.
Okay.
That's what it's called.
Right.
It can be like a really powerful tool for maintaining the health and diversity of these ecosystems.
Okay.
Cattle in particular,
Yeah.
they're very effective grazers.
Okay.
They're not too picky about what they eat.
Right.
And they can really help keep those woody plants in check.
So it's like they're the ultimate eco-warriors.
Pretty much.
What about sheep?
Yeah, sheep too.
Okay.
Sheep grazing might not be as impactful as cattle grazing,
Gotcha.
but it's still a valuable tool,
Yeah.
especially in areas where maybe cattle grazing isn't feasible.
Right.
The key is to try to mimic those natural grazing patterns that kind of shaped these ecosystems for centuries.
So it's like we need to relearn from the past to ensure the future of these salt marshes.
Exactly. We can learn a lot from traditional practices.
But what if you don't have like a ready supply of cows or sheep?
Right.
Are there any other options for managing this overgrowth?
Yeah, there are.
Okay.
Mowing can be an alternative,
Okay.
but it needs to be done carefully.
How so?
Well, it's crucial to remove the cut vegetation
Okay.
because if it's left there to decompose,
Right.
it adds these extra nutrients to the soil,
Okay.
which can fuel more unwanted plant growth.
Oh, so no composting in the salt marsh.
Exactly. You gotta keep things as natural as possible.
Work with nature, not against it.
That's the idea. What strikes you as the most impactful about their research?
Honestly, I think it's so cool that these young students, through their curiosity and hard work,
Right.
were able to uncover such valuable information about these ecosystems that are so often overlooked.
Yeah,
It just highlights the power of education and citizen science.
I totally agree. Their project is a testament to the fact that anyone, regardless of age, can make a difference.
Totally.
And it reminds us that sometimes those simple solutions,
Yeah.
like bringing back grazing animals, can be the most effective.
Absolutely. It's a great reminder that we need to look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
And, like you were talking about the salt meadows before.
Right.
It's amazing how they're this transition zone between the salt marsh and the land.
It is fascinating.
And it just reminds me that our understanding of salt marshes needs to transition too.
Yeah, that's a great point. We need to move away from thinking of these areas as just empty wastelands
Totally.
and recognize their true ecological value.
Yeah, they're these vibrant, complex ecosystems that support a wide variety of life.
Exactly.
They deserve our protection.
Absolutely. And it's encouraging to know that there are steps we can take to ensure that these salt marshes continue to thrive for generations to come.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
But protecting these ecosystems starts with awareness.
It does.
The more people understand their importance,
Right.
the more likely we are to make the right choices to safeguard their future.
Couldn't agree more.
So what can our listeners do to get involved?
Well,
I mean, aside from adopting a cow, of course.
well, for starters, you can visit a salt marsh near you.
Okay.
There's nothing quite like experiencing the beauty and complexity of these ecosystems firsthand.
Yeah.
And you never know, you might even be inspired to get involved in local conservation efforts.
That's a fantastic idea. Getting out there and seeing these places for yourself can really make a difference.
It really can.
You might even run into Kesser and Steen out there doing more research.
I wouldn't be surprised their passion for these ecosystems is contagious.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into the world of salt marshes, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned from Kesser and Steen's incredible project. We've learned that salt marshes are these incredible hubs of biodiversity,
Right.
but they're facing these threats from overgrowth
Mm-hmm.
due to changes in how we use the land.
Yeah.
But there are ways to manage and protect these ecosystems.
For sure.
And it's really cool because sometimes these simple actions like bringing back grazing can have such a huge impact.
It's amazing how Kesser and Steen's project highlights this interconnectedness of everything.
Right.
It reminds us that even these seemingly small changes like reducing grazing can have these ripple effects throughout the entire ecosystem.
Totally. And it makes you realize that everything is linked
Yeah.
and that our actions have consequences.
Absolutely.
It's a powerful lesson.
Yeah.
And it's definitely something we should all keep in mind as we think about our own relationship with the natural world.
It really raises an important question for you.
Oh, yeah.
What can you do as an individual to contribute to the health of these ecosystems?
Well, for starters, spread the word.
Yeah,
Tell your friends and family what you've learned today about salt marshes.
exactly.
The more people who understand their importance, the better.
And don't underestimate the power of simply getting out there and experiencing a salt marsh for yourself.
Oh, for sure.
Walk along the trails, breathe in that salty air, observe the incredible diversity of life that those habitats support.
I love that idea. Those firsthand experiences can be so powerful.
Yeah.
And you might even find yourself inspired to volunteer with a local conservation group
Oh, yeah,
who
totally.
are working to protect these special places.
That's a great thought.
Yeah.
So, as you reflect on Kesser and Steen's journey into the world of salt marshes, think about this.
Okay.
How do our actions impact these delicate ecosystems?
Yeah.
And what can we do, both individually and collectively, to ensure their health and resilience for generations to come?
That's a great question to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of salt marshes.
You're my pleasure.
And a huge shout out to Kesser and Steen for inspiring us with their incredible school project.
Yeah, they do great work.
Keep exploring, stay curious, and let's all work together to protect these amazing places.
Couldn't agree more.
Until next time.